Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Squat Cobbler, episode 67. I'm Kelly Toole at KELLYTHUL on Twitter.
And I'm Mike at Official Pagan on everything.
And tonight, based on, and we love it when we get requests from folks that are listening to Mike and I ramble on and on about music, Mick had requested, he'd gone through a lot of our Alice stuff, and he requested that we review Billion Dollar Babies Battle Axe, which was the original Alice Cooper group, Les Glenn Buxton, one and only release and in 1977. So we are more than happy to go do our track-by-track run of this album. Before we get started, Mike, did you want to go on a tangent on anything? Did you want to give you room to do what you like to do?
So, all right, you mentioned that this album existed when we were doing our reviews, and you had brought up a couple of times, various side projects from Alice Cooper group members. I, of course, was aware that this stuff existed, but I never actually listened to this album until now. So first off, thank you for suggesting this, Mick. That's awesome that you did, because it gave me an opportunity to really sit down and listen to this for the first time. Again, sort of aware in a tangential sense that this existed, but it was nice to really sit down and listen to it. That being said, I didn't really love it. Spoiler alert. But I am looking forward to talking it out with Kelly. Kelly and I didn't really delve into this beforehand. I had a couple of issues, though. So from what I can tell, this was only released on vinyl. It's not available on any streaming services. So I had to listen to a rip from the vinyl on YouTube. And unfortunately, the track listing wasn't super accurate. So going through a proper track list that I have in front of me now, I think some tracks might have been lumped together or missing. So I'm going to do my best as Kelly Sherpas us through this to make sense of my notes to the actual proper track listing of this. But thank you to whoever uploaded that vinyl rip, so at least I got to listen to it. I'm very curious to hear your experience with this album, Kelly, and how you, I assume just as an Alice Cooper fan, came across it, but you mentioned that you have the vinyl.
I do have the vinyl and its wondrous cover.
Oh yeah, I want to talk about the cover when we get
I desperately wanted to love this album because it was the original Alice Cooper group, and they were as much a part of all the greatness that was the original Alice Cooper group as Alice was. I tried super hard to be in love with it, and there are moments that I like on it, but I'm sure we'll get into. You'll see a lot of times in reviews where they'll talk about the group misses Alice almost as much as he misses them in the early recordings. And that will be a theme we'll get in there, that this actually might have gone over better if somebody else was handling some of the vocals on some things, but we'll get into that. But you talked about the recording. So there is this kind of prime on YouTube, this one ripped copy that seems to be the one place you can go to listen to the album online. Its recording history has it's kind of rich, in that the original pressing for Billion Dollar Babies, they really had no luck in a lot of fronts here. The original pressing was so poor that the album skipped repeatedly, and they had to get repressed and returned. So their coming out of the gate was not a really great experience to begin with. The people were buying the album, and it wouldn't work. I don't believe it's ever been recorded digitally. I don't think there's a CD version out there. There is, however, a Billion Dollar Babies Battle Axe live in Flint, Michigan CD out there that contains the original. It used to be out there. I think it's actually been taken down from all sites. I'm not 100% sure, but it had the original recording, it had demos, and then it had actually a live performance in Flint, which had to be a tricky one to get because this tour was only 4 cities long before they packed it in, because it's a pretty complicated stage show, involved roller skates and arena battles, and so four performances of a Battle Axe. So you get that recording. You get demos, which seem to be kind of shadily acquired, but the CD version remastered is clearly a vinyl rip. So it's got kind of interesting recorded history.
Interesting. Yeah, I couldn't find, it wasn't available on any streaming services. And, maybe this is an issue, a rights thing. Whoever owns these recordings, whoever owns the publishing of it. But just for curiosity's sake alone, you would think something like this would be more widely available because of its Alice Cooper group pedigree.
You would think. But nope. So, as we often do before we go delve through the album, we talk about the album art. Kind of spoiled there a little bit that so this is clearly 70s fantasy armored guy with a guitar that is doubles as an axe kind of deal. Lots of bright colors and the stylized Billion Dollar Babies logo in small white lights, which was what was used on the Billion Dollar Babies tour, was their logo as well as they moved it to become Billion Dollar Babies post Alice. I think it's definitely a cover that catches your attention.
I remember when I was a kid, a couple blocks away was the town stoner guy with the creepy van that was airbrushed on the side. This could very well be an image on everybody's childhood stoner guy's van.
It is excellent side of van material. I will not question that at all.
I absolutely hate the logo. Doesn't at all match the imagery that you're seeing. I don't like, if we're going to nitpick the image, other than the fact that it would look amazing on the side of someone's van. Anybody listening to this right now, if you have a van, particularly a van with shag carpet in the back of it, please go and get this airbrushed on the side of your van. we will we will use that on something. Send us pictures of it. I promise you we'll use it on something. So that being said, if I'm going to nitpick the actual image itself, I absolutely hate guitar/axe imagery. Hate it. It's been used so many times by such a wide variety of artists. It really, really gets under my skin. So as soon as I saw the cover of this for the first time, I was like, wow, I'm going to hate this.
So you wouldn't have liked the live show any better because Mike Marconi was the guitarist that replaced Glenn Buxton. And for the show, Michael Bruce and Mike Marconi would come out dressed as the Red Gladiator and the Green Gladiator in attire similar to what's shown on the cover, and they each were sporting clear guitars that were designed in the axe shape for the big battle scene that we'll talk about a little later in this album.
Nice.
So you probably wouldn't have been.
Yeah. Anybody who's listening to this, if you're not sure what I mean, don't just look at the cover of this. Google guitar axe album cover. Like something that generic. You will see hundreds of variations on that theme. And of course, Gene Simmons guitar.
Yeah, as I was going to say, as a corporal in the Kiss Army, I figured you'd be very familiar with the Gene Simmons axe guitar.
Right. So this is something that is so overused that and this is my own personal quibble. Like for anybody who thinks this is a cool retro style image, I get it. And like I said, on the side of somebody's van, this would look awesome. If this was a t-shirt, if it didn't have the guitar axe, it was just that weird retro armor guy, I would probably wear that. I am just so sick of the guitar axe image. And I know that this is a late 70s recording. So at the time that this came out, it probably wasn't as overdone as it is now. I'm sure I'm not saying they were the first ones to do it. Just that, now with decades under our belt after this, so many people have done this. I just really hate that imagery. That's my own personal thing, though.
Does it help it at all that the stage was set up as a large boxing ring? Does that help? No.
It actually, you know what? It might. I've been to a show recently. So I don't know if they're still using this stage setup, so I'm not going to talk about the band because I don't want to spoil the show for anybody. But there's a band who does very theatrical shows. Every tour they do, they change up the stage show, and they had a wrestling ring as part of their stage show, and it was really cool the way that they utilized that in the show. So I may have actually enjoyed the theatrical elements of that, but if they came out with the axe guitars, it would have definitely been a check in the con column for me.
Yeah, and that's the other really kind of interesting thing about this album, because in fact, this was the concept for the next Alice Cooper Group album.
Really?
Yep. What had happened is they did Muscle of Love, and they had released both Billion Dollar Babies, greatest Alice Cooper album of all time, Billion Dollar Babies, and then Muscle of Love, both in '73. So they're touring, big Billion Dollar Babies tour. They release Muscle of Love. They're all pretty exhausted. They're kind of sick of each other. And so Michael Bruce was making noises about doing a solo album. Neil Smith was making noises, and the management's like, well, if you guys go do one, Alice is going to probably do one too. And so around '75, Michael Bruce does something. Alice obviously comes out with Welcome to My Nightmare. And I'm confused by this, but I believe Neil Smith, based on what I can tell, recorded Platinum God in '75 but I believe it was actually released in '99. So I'm a little, I'm a little thrown by that as I was going. I was like, really? Because I kept seeing Platinum God in 1999. I'm like, no, he did it in '75. So they went off. They didn't ever officially like break up. They went off and did their solo stuff, and then Dennis Dunaway and Michael Bruce got back together in Connecticut to start hammering out the next Alice Cooper group concept, and it was going to be this kind of idea of music battles, and of course rock and roll is going to win at the end, and so they were coming up with some of these concepts. And then Alice releases Alice Cooper Goes to Hell, and they go, huh, I don't think we're a band anymore. And they there was a little bit of frustration because if you read the interviews from Alice at that time, he may not have been 100% honest in that he was saying they went their own ways because the band just wanted to play rock and roll in jeans and they were tired of the theatrics. You hear that a lot. Well, obviously, Billion Dollar Baby's Battle Axe is not light on the theatrics, and
No.
they fully intended to do that. I think it just became the group kind of went their own way. But yeah, this was intended to be. They were starting to work out the concepts with the when it started off. The assumption was, okay, let's get started on our next album. We'll, I'll also get back here in a little bit. We'll refine it. And so this is going to be the spirit of the album that would have followed Muscle and Love from the original Alice Cooper group.
So we actually mentioned this before. This is a recurring theme, and I think it was when we were talking about the Ace Frehley record. This is kind of a recurring theme when you see solo records and side projects and things like that. Are these albums that sort of come out of what was intended to be material for the band or the group as a whole's next project?
There's moments, we'll get through it on this album, that it sure feels to me like this was ramped up to be an Alice Cooper group song. Because not all personnel was available, it didn't quite land great. And with that, we will begin our journey through Billion Dollar Baby's Battle.
So you're trying to cut me off because I'm about to launch in 10 minutes about something that has nothing to do with this album.
That's right. We gotta, we've given a lot of background and history on Billion Dollar Babies. I think
we did, and I was not able to find that much information when I was searching for this because I listened to it. I listened to the YouTube rip of it because I wanted to form my own opinions on it, and then I wanted to get a little more background on the project. There's not a ton of stuff out there.
It is hard. The somewhat suspect Live in Flint, Michigan CD did include some very rare photos, which now have kind of made their way to YouTube. So you get to see a little bit of a shot of what the Gladiator gear might have looked like. But to my understanding, there's never been any recording of them performing in full tour mode. Now, later when the reunion and stuff, there's some things, but in this actual tour, there's hardly any images. There's no video. And there's just not a lot of information on it. One of the few places is Sick Things, UK, is an outstanding Alice Cooper site, and they probably have what I think are some of the most extensive information about Alice and other things. And they've got a pretty good write-up on Billion Dollar Baby's Battle Axe. So I'll include a link to that in the notes because it's worth a look. But we kick off with Too Young. Right out of the gate, you hear the Alice Cooper group guitars. There's kind of unquestionably that. But then and there's a couple of moments of, shall we call them Ace Frehley-esque lyrical constructions when they're a little limited. We got I'm X-rated, jail-baited, yeah. Some of the lyrics in there where you've got Michael Bruce. I don't think Michael Bruce is a bad singer, but there's not a lot of depth to his voice, and when it's now kind of coming in as a surrogate for Alice, it's a tough act to follow. But like when he's, spitting out the lyrics about mom and dad just keep telling me no and I might as well be dead. He's trying to put punch behind it, but he can't get that snarl that just comes naturally from Alice. And I think these lyrics could have landed a little better. And I think you could look back to the original Alice Cooper group and see lyrics not dissimilar to this, delivered by Alice, that just land a lot better than they do when they come from Michael Bruce. Sorry, Michael. And of course, they keep talking about Can't Wait Till I'm 18, which is obviously a callback, and a very Alice-like outro with the vocals kind of running on at the end. So it's not a bad song, but boy, I just really felt the vocals didn't carry it, and it wasn't magically musical. So it was okay for me.
So I should get this out of the way right up front. I think a lot of the lyrics on this album are a little thin. You can tell that they're things that could have existed in the Alice Cooper group, but maybe with Alice's delivery and a little bit of punch up from him to add some of the clever wordplay that we're used to, it would have landed a lot differently, like Kelly said. It's not so far out of that realm where it feels like you're in this totally different musical universe, but It's just not the same thing. It's kind of like that. But I'm going to get two big musical quibbles out of the way on this record. And ironically, these are two things that I complained about on some of the Alice solo records. There is way too much backing vocals on this thing. Way too much. And the backing vocals are way too high in the mix. There's also too much keyboard on this. A really big problem of records around this time, because prog rock was getting really big and people were starting to incorporate synthesizers as more of a major element of their sound, not in the way that, like, so I'm going to make two Black Sabbath references on this track, not in the way that Black Sabbath on their early recordings would incorporate synthesizers just to kind of fatten the sound a little bit. It's so low in the mix, and it's something that's barely audible until someone points it out to you. That's kind of what they should have gone for and really focused more on their Detroit rock sound. I think there's too much of a piano-based sort of sound on this record. That and the backing vocals. So too much synth and too much backing vocals. That's my one quibble that's going to run through the entire thing. So I'll just get that done now. This track, Too Young in particular, as Kelly mentioned, plays out a lot like a prequel or sequel to 18. The whole thing feels like a callback to, remember that big hit we had, 18? I'm not sure if that's a good thing, reminding people of a song that clearly performed better now that we have, the time behind this. And as we've mentioned, this is not an easy record to find. It almost feels, here's my second Black Sabbath reference, it almost feels a little bit like, I joke around with people. So when Black Sabbath reunited with Ozzy Osbourne to do their, what is currently their last album, 13, I did not like that record. I'm a big Black Sabbath fan. Prior to that, they had done one final studio recording with Dio before he passed away. That album was called The Devil You Know. It was good. It wasn't amazing. But I jokingly told people when they asked for my opinion on 13, I said 13 was a really important album because it really made you appreciate how good The Devil You Know actually is. I am not a big fan of 18, even though it's on the greatest Alice Cooper record of all time. I think it's the weakest track on that record. Too Young is an important song because it makes me realize how good a song 18 really is.
Yeah, I do think, so I think it's great points, that it does seem to be the sequel. I do feel there's a couple songs, and this is, to me, I think probably the strongest one, where it was like, we're really looking to kind of, in a laboratory, recreate the Alice Cooper group mojo on this song. And when one vital ingredient to what that was all about is not there, it falls a little bit flat from there. But it just really felt like they were trying hard, whether it's callbacks to 18 or just some of the structure of the vocals and where they were coming in would have greatly benefited with the Alice snarl. It just kind of falls a little bit flat. So then we move into Shine Your Love. So the good news on Shine Your Love is they pull back from that. So this becomes more, if you're trying to say, okay, what did Billion Dollar Babies sound like? This gets away from kind of trying to replicate Alice Cooper Group in a laboratory to just an execution of a song. It's better vocals. The vocal itself is better here because it's not Michael Bruce trying to be Alice. It's Michael Bruce just singing. It does feature pretty significant background vocals, so probably not a big winner for Mike on that. Kind of a chipper, a little more chipper song. Not a bad guitar riff to it. It is a lighter fare by far, but it benefits by, it doesn't seem to be trying so hard to recreate something, and it's trying to just kind of stand on its own. It's kind of a light song, and again, another one that I didn't do backflips over, but I did like the fact that this at least felt a little less forced.
Yeah, I don't mind the song. It does, forced is a great way to put Too Young. Too Young definitely feels forced. Kelly really nailed it with that one. Shine Your Love doesn't feel forced. I don't love it. My main quibble with it, I like the guitar riff is good. However, the song really never builds to anything. It seems like in the verse it's building towards a big chorus, but there's not enough distinction musically. There's not enough of a change up musically between the verse and chorus. It just kind of builds and builds and builds and doesn't really go anywhere. The rhythm section gets a little bit splashier on the chorus, but if it wasn't for the overdone backing vocals, the chorus would almost just fade into the actual main verses of the track.
So we'll move on to, so I mentioned that I really, really wanted to love this album, and I struggled too because it just, there were things that were okay, but just there wasn't much that I was like, boy, I can't wait to hear that again. The song on this whole album, although we'll talk about the very tail end of the album, some parts that are kind of neat about it. But I Miss You, to me, is probably the strongest song on the album. Has cowbell, that always is a big plus from there. It has elements of almost the and I'm not saying this to be a smart guy. Love It to Death era Alice Cooper group. There's hints of that mojo in here. It's a solid chorus, nice guitar, but it doesn't feel where it was so forced on Too Young. This is more a little bit like, oh yeah, those are the same guys that did Love It to Death and Billion Dollar Babies. This song at least moves along, and I found it to be, of everything, probably my most enjoyable moment on the listen.
I pretty much agree with everything Kelly said on that. This is by far my favorite song on the album. I got really excited when this one started because I felt like finally this is the Alice Cooper group, the Alice Cooper group that we love, that's on the two greatest in order albums, Love It to Death and Billion Dollar Babies from the Alice Cooper group. We get a great guitar riff, good Detroit rock, a stronger chorus compared to what we've gotten up until this point. This is a really strong song. And I got really excited at this point because I was like, yes, finally the album's really kicking in. We're only going to get great things from here on out.
Yeah. And then, wasn't I the one? So this is where things get confusing, because the prime available copy of this on YouTube is a rip off of an album. This is not listed. Wasn't I the one's not listed? But it is actually on the track listing. It's a ballad. I know Mike, is a giant Jeff Healey fan.
And, I have a tattoo.
Yep. And that was the thing I was struck more than anything else. When I listened to Wasn't I the One, I go, well, this is Angel Eyes. This is basically, it's the same song. Very similar vocal delivery and kind of song structure to it. So I guess they predate Angel Eyes. So I guess Jeff Healey ripped off Billion Dollar Babies. But it's kind of Angel Eyes, and I wasn't a big Angel Eyes fan.
He was like the one huge Battle Axe fan.
Man, this was the guy.
He went to half of their shows, 2 of them.
It was the only track that didn't skip. He bought the original pressing, and this one didn't skip. This is it. So I don't have much to say about it, except it kind of sounds like Angel Eyes, and I don't like Angel Eyes that much.
So I didn't catch the Angel Eyes thing because I'm not as big a Jeff Healey fan as Kelly is, but now that you say that, it makes sense. I listened to the YouTube rip. This is not on that track listing. So I kind of thought that Love Is Rather Blind just had a really, really long intro. It was like a 10-minute long song. I'm glad this is actually a separate track. It's kind of forgettable, though. And that's really sort of the nicest thing I can say about it. And unfortunately, it comes after I Miss You, which is the high point on the record. And like I said, when I got to I Miss You, I got very excited because I thought, we're getting that core Alice Cooper group sound back. And then he immediately followed this up with a ballad that I mistook for an overblown intro to another song.
And an overblown intro to another song that, while has a pretty cool title, Love Is Rather Blind, also falls into that dangerous, in my opinion, forgettable category. It's almost a synth pop. So Bob Dolan who's actually quite an accomplished studio musician, and from all accounts, a very nice guy, from what I could read on the various things. But he gets a lot of action on this album. He gets a lot of action on this song. Not a lot that's memorable about it. There is almost a little bit of a Who-like quality to some of it, which always, I'm open to that. I like that. But yeah, just not a big bell ringer for me. But on the relative sense, I guess, a relative basis, maybe one of the stronger tracks, but nothing like I Miss You.
It's not a bad song per se. I was Googling this particular track because I was trying to see if, I figured something was wrong with the track listing. And I couldn't find a good track listing for this for a while. And so I was like, okay, well, let me Google the song and see if I can get a track length for I Miss You and for Love Is Rather Blind, and see if one of them is crazy long. Otherwise, maybe I'm missing a title in between. There's apparently many, many songs from a wide variety of artists with this exact same title, Love Is Rather Blind. So if you're Googling this song, you're going to have a hard time finding the Billion Dollar Babies version of this. Other than that, and that's actually my only note on it. So Kelly said it's sort of forgettable. My note on it is that it was difficult to Google.
As was most of this album.
Well, yeah, to be fair.
Yeah. But yeah, that one in particular. And then, so the next one gets weird too. Rock and Roll Radio. This is another song that, for it to have a fighting chance, needed Alice Cooper to be singing this song. It does appear that Michael Bruce was possessed by Ace Frehley. The lyrical side of Ace Frehley, when It kind of starts off with, it was my favorite song on my favorite station. It's bigger than King Kong. That's Ace Frehley lyrics right there. That's Ace stuff, but without the really kind of amazing music that Ace brings to the table on solo album. It tries to be, and I think is relatively successful being anthemic. You've got from, when they kind of do the city name check piece, it's got a nice little rhythm to it from there. But another one that was very confusing to me, because as I was doing various Google and YouTube searches on rock and roll radio, Neil Smith came up. Neil Smith Platinum God came up. Then I listened to a track that said Neil Smith Platinum God on YouTube, and it was this track. And so I got confused, and then I went back, and that's where I started to go, when was Platinum God released? 75 or 99? So still fuzzy on that. But actually, Rock and Roll Radio is a track on Platinum God as well. So I'm not sure if it's the same version or not. Alice could make It's Bigger Than King Kong passable as a lyrical construct. Michael Bruce can't.
I feel like when I was listening to this, I was like, if the Alice Cooper group had stayed together, but waned significantly in popularity and became like one of those like heritage nostalgia acts that does long Vegas residencies. Before that was cool. Like I know there's bands doing Vegas residencies now making tons and tons of money, but like back when that was like what happened to artists who couldn't make it touring anymore, I feel like this would be like the big number in their Vegas show. But their Vegas show in like the afternoon in the cocktail lounge.
Yeah, or playing a corporate conference gig that they were the band at the end of the night.
Yeah, state fairs, corporate conference gigs. This was it.
So like it had there are moments, there are hints that this could have been maybe something a little bit special. Just kind of again fell a little flat. So then we moved to Dance With Me. This is one, so I took notes on it. I listened to it on the vinyl a long time ago. I listened to it on the re-listens here to get ready for the show. Before Mike and I got together tonight, I went back and listened to it again to kind of refresh myself on my notes. And I still can't remember this damn song. This is an incredibly forgettable song for me. I do think it's probably, and according to my notes, I'm going to trust them, it might be the most genuinely energetic song on the album. But man, I can't get anything of this song. Every of the other songs, elements of them stick with me. There's nothing on this song that sticks with me, and I as soon as I hear it, I forget it. That's probably not a good sign.
Yeah, so this song for me it has a feel of like a 1950s rock and roll song, and part of that could be, again, heavy reliance on keys. It's like a 1950s rock and roll song that they tried to update with some of that Detroit rock sound.
I'll have to trust you on that because I can't remember it.
That was pretty accurate.
Okay, I believe you. I'll trust you on that. So then we move into Rock Me Slowly, another ballad. Probably, in my opinion, the best vocal performance by Michael Bruce on this album. It's got kind of what becomes the Alice solo ballad mojo to it. Almost a I Never Cry vibe. Passable song, not bad. I don't dislike it. I think kind of this album for a ballad. I mean, it's a decent song from there. And like I said, I do think Michael Bruce does his best vocals on this song.
Yeah, my note on this is Alice ballad. This you nailed it. This feels like it could have been one of the ballads. Like they wrote this for an Alice solo record for his what became his traditional ballad spot on the record for a while there.
So now we're going to move into kind of a suite that ends the album. So I think the fundamental concept was, again, different kinds of music fighting it out against each other with rock and roll prevailing at the end. So there's that piece kind of going on. And so this suite that begins to cover that begins with Egomania, which is an instrumental. It gets to turn Michael Bruce and Mike Marconi loose on guitar. So I think it's actually some of the best guitar work on the album. And it's just kind of that introductory piece. But we are definitely heading down the road to prog rock and synth rock and lots of other kind of arena things with this. But at a minimum, Egomania lets the guitars take a little more center stage.
So at the beginning of this, like Kelly said, this all sort of works together as sort of a suite from here to the end of the record. Hearing what the live show consisted of, the few that happened, it makes perfect sense. You can totally see where they were going with this. However, Egomania has some great guitar stuff on it. I wouldn't say as a track it stands up to I Miss You, but it's easily the best guitar work on the album. A lot of the leads and solos and stuff that are happening on this are excellent. Then the rest of the suite sort of becomes everything that I wasn't a huge fan of on this record, as Kelly sort of already mentioned.
Yeah, because then Yes parachuted in to the recording studio and took over, and we move into Battle Axe, which you would assume would be some major guitar thrashing, but no,
Nope.
it's high core progressive rock. How familiar you are with the movie Rollerball, like
Fairly.
the James Caan original Rollerball,
Yeah.
um, classic Rollerball?
I choose to believe the LL Cool J remake doesn't exist.
That's I think a good call. It's reminiscent of that, and I think some of the themes and the costuming here and all that is also not entirely far from Rollerball. But you get very progressive rock on Battle Axe. You get that Rollerball kind of feel to it, huge amounts of synthesizer, and this prog rock kind of vocal thing about. I mean, it's kind of interesting lyrics they're going to about see the bloodline in my family tree. That's kind of cool, but it's kind of just setting up this battle axe type of thing, and kind of setting up for the big culminating battle. I mean, I get what it's trying to do to move the story along, but you look at kind of what happens in Schools Out when they start to kind of knit some stuff together, and it just flows a lot smoother and easier than it does here. So, and particularly, it's just a little too keyboard heavy for me.
Yeah, the ending of this suite is everything that I wasn't crazy about on this record. Tons of keyboards, lots of big backing vocals, not, very dense lyrics. It doesn't end on a particularly strong note for me. However, hearing what the live show would have consisted of, I can see where this was meant to go.
Yeah, I mean, to a degree, it's almost like Feed My Frankenstein. That okay, if I saw actually what was going on the stage, I would get when there are certain kind of musical spaces going on. They're like, well, I don't know how exciting this is. That's because it's a soundtrack for what's happening on the stage, and I think there's a lot of that here. It moves into then Sudden Death, which is I don't know if it's a separate song or a continuation of Battle Axe or what. It's always listed parenthetically, so a lot of synth. I think at this point we move from Rollerball to Logan's Run in terms of another movie kind of thing. Saved slightly by at the tail end of and it's very it's solid synthesizer work, but it's just kind of not what I was after. It didn't really speak to me, but it's not just it's not bad. It's just not doesn't ring my bell. And then at least at the kind of end of Sudden Death, it does pull up the guitars again that we got a little bit in Egomania. And so that was a nice note at the end when the guitars come in at the end, but it was a whole lot of synth before we got to that.
Yeah, and for anybody who thinks that I'm just shitting on synth playing, I'm a synth player. So I'm not trying to lend authority to that, just to say that I don't have a problem with synthesizers. I think that this proggy synth approach was so overdone at this time, and to me it's detracting from the core Detroit rock sound that I wanted to hear on this record.
Yeah, Detroit, beyond being name checked in rock and roll radio, is not a whole lot present on this album.
No, unfortunately.
And then it wraps up this suite with, of course, there's going to be the big battle, and rock and roll is going to come out on top. So Winner, pre-Charlie Sheen, comes out as the final track. We get a $1 Billion Baby's name check in the lyrics. We get crowd cheering. Again, I don't know if I want to use the word forced again, but it is pretty much say, okay, so we got to declare someone a winner and kind of establish, yay. And it didn't feel particularly clever or elegant as far as it's put together. Okay song, nothing I'm doing backflips over to end the album.
Yeah, it was an okay song. Name checks $1 Billion Babies, like Kelly mentioned. Again, this whole suite probably plays a lot better had they been an ongoing concern as a live band and more people had seen the show. It probably would have played out better. Kelly made a great analogy that this is like listening to some of the live recordings of Feed My Frankenstein, where you hear the theatrics happening without really knowing what's going on if you haven't seen an Alice show. That's what I feel like much of this suite is. Other than Egomania, you get some cool guitar stuff in the beginning, but as it progresses, it just turns into a proggy soundtrack to something you're not seeing.
I think what this points out is it's so unfortunate that they went their other ways, because I think the chemistry, when you take what the individual performers, Dennis Dunaway, Michael Bruce, Neil Smith, and Alice, brought to the table, and when that was mixed together, you got something that was pretty amazing. And now Alice, as his solo career has continued, has ended up doing some what I find really enjoyable and amazing things. It's a different composition, than he would have gotten with these guys. And I think together they make themselves better. And so that's, to me, the biggest disappointment on that is that you just kind of through this whole album go, if Alice was in the room and if Alice was hanging on some of the vocals, it's not that he's carrying these guys, but it's just that other ingredient that could have made some of the stuff work, and some of the things likely would have been reshaped a little bit. My guess is there'd been a little less synthesizer.
I numerous times throughout this album kind of found myself saying, like, this could have worked as an Alice Cooper Group song. And it was missing that ingredient. Similar to when we went back through the albums, I placed Goes to Hell really low on my list. And part of that was because it just didn't feel like an Alice Cooper record to me. It wasn't a rock record, or it wasn't enough of a rock record for me. So that was, the corresponding to this sort of in Alice's solo career, where I could be like, he really needed the Alice Cooper Group on this record, and it would have came together much better for me. That's sort of what this is. They really needed Alice. I could see this being an Alice Cooper Group record, and that chemistry between those guys elevating this record.
Yeah, I think you make a great point that if you kind of look from a timing standpoint, Goes to Hell comes out, and that's when they realize, oh, gig's up. I guess we better kind of do our own thing. And so followed by Lace and Whiskey. And if you look at those two Alice albums and the things that are missing in it, are the things that what these guys bring. And the reasons for me Battle Axe ultimately doesn't work that great is the things that Alice could have brought to elevate Battle Axe.
Absolutely. And that being said, I don't love Goes to Hell or Lace and Whiskey. I think Kelly may have placed them higher, but I don't think it was significantly higher. Like, I don't think they were top tier albums for you, if I remember correctly. I was going to say, I don't love Goes to Hell and Lace and Whiskey. And while I don't think we placed them in the same spots, I don't think those were top tier albums for you.
No, they weren't. I think we had, I'd have to go back to our stats, but I do think we probably were the most divergent on Goes to Hell. I think you had Goes to Hell like bottom 3.
Yeah.
You had it deep. And I didn't have it very high, but I didn't have it quite that deep. But we were probably pretty close to dead on Lace and Whiskey. That's my guess.
Yeah, and I think what you see there is, as Alice continued, he found his own footing as a solo artist. And, made so many great classic records that we both love. It's a shame that there wasn't more Billion Dollar Babies records after this, because I feel like they would have found their footing as well.
Yeah, I really do. I think they would have. But it was this whole combination of, you got a bad pressing, you didn't have a lot of support from your record company, you're coming off of, the Billion Dollar Babies tour, was featured in Time magazine, huge, gigantic tour, a lot of things going on with it. So they're used to kind of this major, major thing going on. Alice takes off with Welcome to My Nightmare, TV special, big concert show, and they had a hard time logistically recreating what they wanted to do. Was hard to replicate. So you only had the 4 shows, and then I just think they ran out of gas. But it would have been super interesting, given a couple more rounds, to see what could have come of this.
Yeah, and that's really the real shame of this to me, is Billion Dollar Babies could have been, they really could have found their footing like Alice did with his solo records. This could have been an interesting thing as it progressed, to kind of hear where they would have gone in a few albums with a few tours under their belt.
All right, Mick, there you go. We talked about Billion Dollar Babies. I didn't realize you had never heard it at all, Mike.
No, I knew it existed, but I never listened to it.
Yeah, I just stumbled across it back in the day, kids, when there were record stores you could flip through in the cutout bin. All of a sudden, there it sat. I was like, oh, crap, I've got to buy this. So I will include links to the Sick Things right up on it, where you get probably the best information about this album, backstory, because there's not a lot out there in the world on this. Include some YouTube links so you can listen to not only the YouTube version that Mike and I enjoyed to prep for this show, but the Flint, Michigan live show one as well. And it's really most of the Battle Axe album live, so it's kind of interesting. And then they kind of do Alice Cooper songs towards the end. So that's kind of interesting to listen to. So you get some goodies in the blog post, folks. That's all I got to say for tonight. How about you?
No, I think that about wraps it up, unless you want to talk about something completely unrelated for a while.
Oh, tempting. But I think I'm just going to say thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. All right, I'm going to stop the broadcast.